Make no mistake, we are the most powerful nation on Earth, and the biggest economy to boot. Our military, our industry, our technology, we dominate all of it. And yet, strangely enough, our food is shockingly bad. We call it junk food ourselves, that's how bad it's gotten. Our obesity rates have climbed so high that even we can't ignore it anymore. Childhood obesity and chronic disease have already reached crisis levels. But here's the thing, we weren't always like this. Our modern diet didn't just happen on its own. This whole transformation started right here back in the 1970s. Our government at the time went all in on mass-producing corn and soybeans, chasing the cheapest calories they could find. That single decision built the plate sitting in front of us today. It's both the product and the side effect of a system engineered for maximum national efficiency. So how did the country that conquered the world end up here? Let's rewind and find out. In the 1970s, we were under pressure from every direction. Abroad, we were locked in a Cold War standoff with the Soviet Union. That fight wasn't just about missiles and tanks. It was about proving whose system could actually feed and enrich its people better. And the simplest proof that capitalism was winning? Food. Everywhere, all the time. That was the exact opposite image of Soviet citizens standing in bread lines with ration cards. Meanwhile, at home, we were fighting a completely different battle, a society coming apart at the seams. The Vietnam War dragged on with no end in sight. Racial tensions were exploding in the streets, crime rates were skyrocketing, and trust in the government had hit rock bottom. And frankly, our leaders didn't have great options. They couldn't end the war overnight, and they sure couldn't fix decades of structural problems in a single term. So, in the middle of this domestic crisis, the government played the one card it had left, keeping food prices low. Even if wages weren't going up, keeping grocery bills down could keep people quiet for a while. Cheap, abundant food was the fastest, most efficient sedative for a restless nation. In a lot of ways, it was the only lever the government had left to pull. Now, let's be clear about something. American food wasn't exactly a health food paradise before the 1970s either. It was greasy, heavy, and meat-centric. But up until then, food was still something made by human hands. It was cooked at home, it took effort, it took time. What changed was the country around it. By this point, the whole country ran like a machine on fast forward, and cooking started looking like a waste of time, an inefficiency to be engineered out of daily life. That shift in mindset even changed how we thought about the ingredients themselves. As long as it filled you up, nobody cared much what was actually in it. And on top of that cold, calculated logic of efficiency, our government began rewriting agricultural policy from the ground up. With crises piling up on every front and re-election on the line, the Nixon administration was nervous. For Nixon, food prices weren't just an economic statistic, they were votes. Forget unemployment, forget GDP growth. The number that scared him most was the one flashing at the supermarket register. Washington understood one thing perfectly well. Prices, not paychecks, decide elections. So the Nixon administration made a bold first move, imposing direct wage and price controls, trying to force prices down by government fiat. It didn't last. The market pushed back hard and prices snapped right back up. Boxed into a corner, the Nixon administration flipped its entire strategy. Instead of capping prices, why not flood the market with so much supply that prices had nowhere to go but down? And, right on cue, the perfect man for the job stepped into the spotlight. Nixon's Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Butz. Earl Butz's philosophy was brutally simple. Get big or get out. Scale up like a corporation and maximize output, or hang up your boots. Washington's math was just as blunt. Explode production, prices fall, groceries get cheaper, and the public calms down. For a government desperate to put out a fire, it looked like the fastest, most tempting fix on the table. And honestly, at the time, it looked like the smart play. But this one decision reshaped rural America top to bottom. The old policies that had protected small family farms and managed supply got tossed out, and the number of farms in this country plummeted almost overnight. In their place, farm sizes kept ballooning, and big capital and industrial-scale operations took over. The problem was, this new system, engineered purely for efficiency, collided with a variable nobody saw coming, and things spun out of control fast. In 1972, before this radical experiment in economies of scale even had time to settle in, a grain shock that froze the global food order in its tracks. That year, the Soviet Union got hit with a catastrophic harvest failure. So they started quietly buying up American grain in massive quantities, not through government channels, but through private grain traders, under the radar. When the full scale of it came out later, the whole country was floored. Wheat, corn, feed grain, entire stockpiles vanished overseas so brazenly that it went down in history as the Great Grain Robbery. Grain prices exploded, and meat prices went haywire right along with them. But scarier than the shortage itself was the collective panic it triggered. Even the most powerful nation on Earth could go hungry. From that moment on, food stopped being just another commodity you buy and sell. It became a strategic resource, something we had to have in surplus. Always. Like oil, like weapons. Something that could never, ever run out. Crisis or no crisis. From then on, agricultural policy got a lot simpler. It wasn't about feeding people well anymore. It was about producing whatever it took to keep bellies full. The push for maximum production, which started in the early 70s, now had an unbeatable justification behind it: national security. From here on out, food got judged by three things: how cheap, how long it lasts, how much of it we could crank out. Not nutrition, not freshness. TV dinners, instant meals, and the drive-through boom were all byproducts of this new, efficiency-obsessed, security-driven system. It's no coincidence that the McDonald's hamburger, born back in the 1950s, took over the American diet right around this time. An already efficient business model met 1970s national policy, and the combination exploded. This is exactly where the two ingredients that would turn our diet into junk food step onto the stage. Under Secretary Earl Butz's policies, our farmers poured their land into two crops above all others: corn and soybeans. They grew practically anywhere, and the yields were great. And the more you produced, the bigger your government subsidy, so why wouldn't you plant them? If prices ever crashed, the government would cushion the fall too, so nobody had to worry about overproducing. So corn and soybeans started pouring out at an unmanageable rate. Before long, we ran out of places to store it all. Prices collapsed. Left unchecked, this was going to crush both farmers and the government's budget. But cutting back wasn't an option either. After living through one food security scare, nobody wanted to risk another. Cut production and you risk shortage. Keep producing and you eat the losses. Somehow, all that surplus corn and soy had to go somewhere, and American industry found a way. Companies started breaking these crops down and remaking them into something else entirely. Corn became starch, and starch became high-fructose corn syrup, dramatically cheaper than sugar, easy to pour into anything since it's a liquid, and a dream for shipping and shelf life. Soybean oil became oil. Soybean oil was cheap, endlessly scalable, and basically flavorless, so it could slip into almost anything without anyone noticing. This is how ultra-processed food was born, not cooked in a kitchen, but manufactured in a factory. From here on, our tables filled up with food that was cheap and terrible for us. High-fructose corn syrup and soybean oil became the secret sauce of the entire modern food industry. Corn syrup didn't just sweeten soda, it turned up in bread, sauces, even deli meat, sweetening everything and stretching shelf life way out. Soybean oil basically cornered the market on fat in fried and processed foods. Crunchy chips, soft bread, creamy mayo, salad dressing, frozen fries, even chocolate bars and energy bars. If something's crispy or soft in just the right way, chances are soybean oil is behind it. There was another use for all that corn: cattle feed. Cows that used to graze on grass were switched to a corn-heavy diet, which fattened them up and marbled the meat far faster than before. That's what sent steak and burger prices crashing down. Thanks to this whole industrial system, we entered an era of dirt-cheap meat unlike anything in history. Our food industry didn't stop at just making things cheap. It needed people to keep eating. So it went straight for the brain, not the stomach. Humans have a built-in reward system, wired by evolution to respond to sweet, fatty, and salty flavors. In nature, though, almost nothing hits all three of those at once, and hard. Ultra-processed food does exactly that, delivering all three triggers together, over and over. The magic combo: sugar, fat, and salt, all at once. Through endless trial and error, food companies zeroed in on the exact ratio that makes it almost impossible to stop eating. Too sweet and you get sick of it fast. Too salty and your body instinctively rejects it. So companies engineered a razor-thin sweet spot, what food scientists literally call the bliss point: maximum pleasure with zero sense of being full. Because of that design, our brains never get the signal to stop, even after we've already taken in more than enough calories. This whole trend got even more powerful in the 1980s, when a completely wrong idea took hold across the country. Fat is the enemy, but sugar is basically harmless. Grocery shelves flooded with low-fat products, but strip out the fat and food turns bland, so corn syrup rushed in to fill the gap. It was so cheap that food companies had zero reason to hold back on using it. So while we thought we were getting healthier by cutting fat, we were actually flooding our bodies with something far worse. And right alongside this came a new marketing weapon: supersizing and free refills. Pay just a little more, get way more food. A pricing trick that convinced customers that not going big was basically leaving money on the table. Nobody worked this angle better than McDonald's. Bigger cups still turned a profit, extra fries barely cost them anything, all thanks to the endless dirt-cheap surplus of corn and soybeans sitting behind it. That's how our plates filled up fast with food that was cheap and convenient. And just as fast, that same food started quietly wrecking our bodies from the inside. The tragic fallout from all this ultra-processed food eventually showed up in the numbers. In the early 1960s, adult obesity in this country sat at around 13%. Today, it's over 40%, more than triple in just 60 years. And this wasn't confined to one group or one region. It happened everywhere, all at once. That alone should tell you it's not just about personal willpower or bad habits. Even more alarming is severe obesity, a BMI of 40 or higher, the range doctors flag as a medical emergency. Back in the 1960s, that was under 1% of the population. Now it's pushing close to 10%. That means roughly 1 in every 10 Americans is living in a state that requires urgent medical attention. Childhood obesity tells the same story. In the early 1970s, about 5% of kids and teens were obese. Today, it's over 20%, 1 out of every 5 children. Our actual diet backs this up too. According to recent CDC data, about 53% of the calories the average American adult eats come from ultra-processed food, and for kids and teens, that number climbs to around 62%. Look at the packaged food on grocery shelves, and around 70% of it qualifies as ultra-processed, though in terms of actual calories consumed, it's a bit over half. And this diet translates directly into disease statistics. Studies show that for every 10% increase in ultra-processed food intake, the risk of type 2 diabetes rises roughly 12 to 17%. Over 40% of American adults, 2 out of every 4, are pre-diabetic. The number of diagnosed diabetics has more than quadrupled since the 1980s. And the chronic disease numbers are even more staggering. Roughly 60% of American adults live with at least one of high blood pressure, heart disease, or diabetes. 40% are dealing with 2 or more chronic conditions at once. That means the majority of us are spending our entire lives dependent on medication and the healthcare system. And it all shows up clearly in life expectancy. Ours peaked at 78.9 years in 2014, plateaued for a while, then took a nosedive during COVID, dropping to 76.1 years in 2021. It slowly climbed back since then, hitting a record high of 79.0 years in 2024, finally clearing that old 2014 peak. But it took a full decade just to get back to where we started, and as you're about to see, we're still well behind the rest of the developed world. Compare us to other countries, and the gap really stands out. Major OECD nations average between 81 and 83 years. Japan sits around 84. Western Europe and Canada hover around 82. Among our peer group, we're near the very bottom. Healthcare spending is the exact opposite story. We spend roughly $14,885 per person per year on healthcare. Comparable wealthy nations average around $7,371. We're spending almost twice as much and still living shorter lives. In short, we make ourselves sick with cheap food, then pay through the nose with the most expensive healthcare system on the planet to manage it. Here's the thing. None of this came out of nowhere. Back in the 1980s, the obesity, diabetes, and heart disease numbers were already sounding the alarm. We just chose not to listen. The reason we can't quit ultra-processed food is, ironically, because it's been so damn effective at running this country. From day one, this food was engineered to be cheap, fast, and convenient, designed to feed people quickly and get them back to work. And it worked. We fed a massive population on the cheap, kept prices stable, and squeezed every ounce of productivity out of the workforce. Ultra-processed food was basically the cheap fuel that powered America's rise as a superpower. Sure, obesity and diabetes showed up down the road as serious side effects, but by then, it was already too late to turn back. The food industry had become such a massive pillar of American jobs and political funding that touching it risked shaking the whole economy. And then came the convenient excuse, health is a personal choice. That let the government hand the blame right back to individuals instead of fixing the system. So what's on our plates today isn't a story of policy failure. It's the story of a system built purely for efficiency that succeeded almost too perfectly. We borrowed against our own future health to fund short-term growth, and now, even if we wanted to stop the machine, we're stuck riding it. Recently, though, the Trump administration rolled out a set of dietary guidelines that broke sharply from the past. The message underneath it all is clear. The way we've been eating simply isn't sustainable anymore. The guidelines boil down to 4 key points. First, ultra-processed food is now officially flagged as a health risk. No more dressing it up as harmless convenience food. Second, the guidelines push hard for cutting back on sugar and refined carbs, especially drinks and snacks loaded with high fructose corn syrup. Third, protein and fat are getting a second look. Fat, demonized for decades, shouldn't automatically be avoided. Instead, pairing it with protein to sustain satiety is the recommended approach. And fourth, food quality matters more than calorie count. In other words, worry less about how much you're eating and more about what you're actually putting in your body. So why now, of all times? Cost, not ethics. Obesity, diabetes, and heart disease have stopped being just personal health issues. They're draining Medicare and Medicaid, dragging down workplace productivity, and even undermining military recruitment and the public workforce. The short-term efficiency we bought with cheap food has finally reached the point where it's actively eating into our national competitiveness. But these guidelines have clear limits. The biggest problem: they ask individuals to make different choices while leaving the entire system exactly as it is. Farm subsidies still overwhelmingly favor corn and soybeans. The pricing structure still tilts in favor of ultra-processed food. And for low-income Americans especially, most of the food they can actually afford is still the unhealthy stuff. In other words, the system stays untouched while individuals are simply told to be smarter. Political reality gets in the way too. The food industry controls both a massive share of jobs and a massive flow of campaign money. Touch that structure and you're guaranteed fierce pushback. So, the direction has shifted, but the actual enforcement is weak and the pace is slow. The most accurate way to put it: we finally admitted there's a problem, but we haven't yet made the call to actually dismantle the efficiency-driven machine we built decades ago. To really understand this extreme choice, it's worth stepping back and asking whether there was another path. Not every capitalist nation walked this same road. We chose to build our national power on explosive productivity and sheer scale. Meanwhile, a lot of European nations chose to root their strength in quality of life and social sustainability instead. And now, both sides are paying entirely different bills for it. We're paying with staggering healthcare costs and chronic disease. Europe is paying with slower growth and a higher cost of maintaining its social systems. There's no clean answer for which choice was right, but one thing is certain: every nation has to pay some cost to keep its system running, and that cost always lands on somebody. We paid that cost with our own dinner tables, with our own health. In exchange, we got overwhelming productivity and a powerful nation. Whether that trade was worth it is a call every one of us has to make for ourselves. But one chilling paradox remains: becoming a powerful nation and having your people actually live well, those two things might not point in the same direction at all.